The things that we're going to talk about today, again, we always look at this through a leadership lens and the kinds of things that you might want to be working with your own teachers. So we're going to actually focus on, in particular, the structure. But just as a reminder, so when we think about the new math curriculum, we might think about changes that we see in terms of structure. The fact that it's digital provides different opportunities, provides links for teachers, and also has professional learning supports. And another way to look at the curriculum is actually to focus on the content, to recognize that there are some new strands, that there's some new content, and even with some content that's familiar, there may be some new approaches, particularly in some of those areas that are mentioned on the slide: fractions, integers, patterning, data. So although it might seem, oh, I know this, it might be approached in a different way based on some of the research. We know that as teachers approach a new curriculum, there are a variety of different types of knowledges that they need to have. So they need to have a knowledge of the new curriculum structure and the kinds of supports. They also need knowledge of the new math content, or, as I mentioned, new approaches or progressions with familiar content. It could even be knowledge of policies, and Nadine brought up some of that in terms of what will the assessment policy look like in terms of SEL, for instance. But they also need knowledge of how do I actually translate this curriculum into practice. So there are a variety of different things, and it's hard as leaders to think about where do we begin. The other thing to keep in mind is that these different types of knowledges require different kinds of professional learning supports. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. So in other words, if it's about new curriculum structure and supports, that's the kind of thing that, well, it might be the kind of knowledge that you're getting, for instance, in this little preliminary discussion. So it could be done through a workshop or resources or documents. New math content, again, that some of that could be done with workshops and resources, new approaches to the content, new policies. But all of this also helps to have dialogue with colleagues. And as we learn new ideas, it's not enough just to take in some of that knowledge. We need time to talk. But when we really look at what does it mean to translate this curriculum into classroom practice, that's not the kind of knowledge that one develops from a workshop or a webinar. It really is the kind of thing that we understand and learn about as we dialogue with colleagues, as we enter into professional learning communities, and as we connect with knowledgeable others. And knowledgeable others doesn't have to be a person necessarily. It could be particular articles, writing, or resources that help us understand things. So as leaders, we need to keep in mind that there are different kinds of professional learning opportunities that we need to be able to offer our teachers, because there's no one right format for all of these kinds of knowledges. Today, in fact, we're going to focus on this new curriculum structure and support so that we have an understanding kind of the framework of how does this work, what's available, where do I find things, and then where do I go from there. So, I mean, this is one diagram that kind of has everything all together. It may not be the most informative one, but it is a schema that helps us see that we have kind of social emotional learning skills and one area that are connected with mathematical processes. And all of this feeds into what we would consider the mathematics content strands, and they're clearly laid out there. So many of these slides, by the way, that I'm sharing with you are not imaginative things that I've created. Many of the slides are actually screenshots from the ministry curriculum document. And I think that it might not say much about me, but it should be a good message to you in the sense that this is all handy. It's all available. So this is kind of an overview, and it shows things all together. But what are some of the features that we know that exist in that structure? Well, we know it's digital. And we know that in that digital format, it actually can provide us with different layouts and different views. And we're going to look at some of those layouts and views today. It also has links to support for teachers: continuum, samples, notes, glossary, videos. So all of those professional learning supports that already exist and will continue to be added kind of create what I consider to be one-stop shopping. So in other words, as a teacher or as a leader, you don't have to go searching for all of these websites to find, oh, where can I find that? Because it actually is all connected to the math curriculum. I mean, it might take us a while and playing around with the math curriculum to be able to find all those things. I know some leaders in math education have developed almost a scavenger hunt for teachers to work through to find all the different components within that curriculum. So we'll look at some of those structures today. So I'm just happened to pick grade 4 and patterns and relationships. This is a screenshot, nothing special. I'm focusing on the overall expectation, C1, identify, describe, extend, etc., about a variety of patterns. And so you can see on this screenshot, I would be able to click on specific expectations, comparing grades, which we're going to look at more carefully in a minute. And we'll kind of pretend I just clicked on that and looked at the specific expectation. In fact, I'm going to focus on the one called C1.2. So notice right now, I'm not really focusing too much on the content of this. I'm just looking at how is this kind of mapped out. So I know that I've got the C1 is the overall expectation, C1.2 is specific. And if I were to click on teacher supports, I get a pop-up. And this is like nothing special about this specific expectation. Every single expectation has this. So there's nothing magic about this one. That's not why I picked it. I picked one that might make sense to most of us. And so I get key concepts, and you're only seeing an abbreviated format of this. So it talks about different kinds of key concepts and ideas that teachers might need to know. It goes into more detail even by the time I get to the 4th bullet point in terms of translating the pattern from something concrete to tables of values, etc. So it does give the teacher some ideas, and more will be added in terms of examples and sample tasks, very specific to that grade, in fact. I'm going back to what this screen looked like. So if instead, when I was back at that overall expectation screen, I actually wanted to compare grades. So if I were to click on compare grades, because I want to say, gee, what kind of prior knowledge maybe did they need to have? The compare grades actually gives me the grade before and the grade after. So it gives me 3 grades, and it shows me, okay, I'm teaching grade 4. These are the specific expectations, but I can look back and I can see, oh, what would be the prior knowledge? Now, this is particularly useful to a teacher right now because they might even want to compare whether they can expect the students to have this prior knowledge, and they might want to look at the 2005 curriculum. And I'll give you a way of, I'll show you a way that you could look at that as well. This might also be helpful to a teacher who is teaching a combined class and therefore wants to see, well, how would this expectation look different in grade 3 to grade 4 or 4 to 5, depending on how those classes are combined. So again, no matter what grade I'm in, if I click on that compare grades, I get to see the grade before and the grade after. If I'm in grade 8, I get to see 3 grades. It doesn't go to grade 9 because they're still working on that curriculum. I would see grade 7, 6, 7, and 8 in that case, but always 3 grades. Another way to look at it is this, what's called a strand overview, but in a sense, it's a continuum. So in other words, what it's looking at is this is grade 1 to grade 8. So I really can see how this concept is developed over time. So although I'm teaching grade 4, let's say, I can see how was this developed from grade 1 to grade 4. And where is it going from there? So this is particularly helpful. And again, this is not, I know I was working with a group of kind of beginning teachers the other day, and they said to me, well, what website can I find this on? And that's the key. It's not on a different website. It's all connected with the curriculum. And every expectation I click on, I will get this strand overview so I can see the whole thing. This is also helpful. I hesitated to show you the strand overview for the coding expectations because when you look at it, it feels a bit overwhelming. And I find that some teachers are kind of nervous about the coding curriculum. They might be teaching grade 5 and they might say, oh, I'm reading this expectation. I don't have a clue what they're talking about. Well, we really can't expect with new content that teachers can jump in and immediately address the grade 5 coding expectations. One, their students might not have the prior knowledge, and two, they might not have the prior knowledge. So actually the strand overview might be useful for that teacher to look back and say, you know what, let's just start with grade 1 and let's work our way up, because there's obviously some prior knowledge that we need to have. So these strand overviews can be helpful in that sort of a way as well. So what are some ways to use these kinds of continuum of learning? Well, it helps teachers to support students as they can see what learning comes before and what learning follows. We know quite often teachers look at the grade that they have to teach and don't necessarily look at the before and after. But this is a really good way, let's say, to get teachers in a division to work together to see it. How does this play out over 3 grades? It really helps teachers in terms of what are next steps for students, addressing a learning gap, what prior knowledge do they maybe not have, differentiating instruction, or as I mentioned, teaching those combined grades. So I think it's important to know that that's available and there. And as a school leader, to be thinking about, well, how could I bring this to my teacher's attention and what kinds of opportunities might I give them to work with this? But there's more. I feel like I'm an infomercial here. But there's more in the sense that there are other supports. So there's the context and the front matter. There's the glossary. There are examples, key concept, and there is more coming. So I know that the ministry is adding sample tasks. We know that there are long range plans, et cetera. So there are many ways, as well as other places where people can find support. So for instance, the Ontario Association for Mathematics Educators have developed supports. They are also receiving funding from the ministry to support. So that's another place to look for where we can find supports for teachers. Now, again, I'm still on the ministry website. So we know that there's a discussion of the curriculum context, there are resources, there are long-range plans, there are videos they can watch. And in fact, this is also on the site. So this high impact instructional practices in mathematics is a nice 26-page document that actually outlines effective teaching practices in mathematics. It would be a very handy thing as a leader as a school leader to be thinking about, okay, what does this look like in a classroom? What might be some of the look fors? So it's a nice document that's, although it's 26 pages, it's not dense, it's easily readable. It's the kind of thing you could look at one page and you could kind of focus on that when you're meeting with your staff. There's another document that talks about key changes. So the Ontario curriculum from 2005 and how it compares with the current one. And we know that there are long-range plans, which are meant to be samples, long-range plans for each grades. So for instance, in the primary division, we know in any division that we have them organized by questions. So what are some big questions to structure our learning in a long-range plan? Or they could be organized also by topics. We also know that some of these were developed by the ministry and others were documents, long-range plans developed by different school boards within Ontario. And again, these are samples. They're not meant to be a doctrine that one needs to follow. They're not policy, but they give people a sense of, so what might this curriculum look like? So I'd encourage you to kind of have a look at what those look like. So again, other features to look for as you look at the curriculum: glossary, sample tasks, examples, videos. All of these kinds of supports are put there and being put there as we speak to be able to help to support teachers. So I will turn this over to Nadine or Brad, who's going to talk about the breakout rooms.
Thanks, Chris. So this is the part where you will be able to pick your breakout session And while we do have some questions prepared on the topics, the questions are only meant to start the conversation. We really mean for this to be a place where you can share with colleagues, raise questions, raise issues, challenges that you're facing, solutions that you may have to suggest to your colleagues. So we really want this to be a conversation together about how we can implement the math curriculum. So your choice of topics. So Brad will activate the option now. So Brad, it's 4:24. So let's give 20 minutes of conversation. So at the bottom, I'm going to stop this. I had just did the recording for